The rattle of the stagecoach wheels against the dusty trail couldn't drown out the thoughts swirling in Lillian Gardner's mind as she stared out at the vast Wyoming territory stretching before her like an uncertain future. The year was 1874, and at 25 years old, she was traveling alone to a new life with nothing but 2 trunks and the crushing weight of her past. "White Rock Station coming up!" the driver called out, his voice barely audible over the thundering hooves and creaking wood. Lillian adjusted her bonnet and straightened her travel-worn dress. White Rock wasn't her final destination, but rather a necessary stop on her journey west. She had accepted a position as a schoolteacher in the growing settlement of Pine Creek, still another day's travel away. The advertisement had specifically requested unmarried women of good moral character with no encumbrances, a description that fit her perfectly, though not by choice. The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of a weathered building with White Rock Station painted in fading letters across its facade. A handful of buildings stretched down what passed for a main street, and dusty-looking men milled about, eyeing the new arrival with undisguised curiosity. "End of my route, madam," the driver said, climbing down to help with her luggage. "Pine Creek coach comes through tomorrow noon." Lillian stepped down, her legs stiff from the journey. "Is there somewhere I might stay for the night?" "Mrs. Wilson runs a boarding house just yonder," he said, pointing to a 2-story structure with curtained windows. "Clean beds, fair prices." With a grateful nod, Lillian collected her smaller trunk and began walking toward the boarding house, leaving the driver to follow with her larger one. The dry air carried the scent of dust, horses, and something cooking a far cry from the crowded Boston streets she'd left behind. Mrs. Wilson proved to be a plump, pleasant woman who showed Lillian to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. "Supper's at 6 sharp," she informed her. "Wash basins there, privy's out back." Left alone, Lillian sank onto the narrow bed and finally allowed herself a moment of quiet desperation. The doctor's words still haunted her. "The scarring from the fever is extensive. I'm afraid you'll never be able to bear children, Miss Gardner." At 22, those words had shattered her engagement to Richard Holloway, scion of a prominent Boston family. His parents had made it abundantly clear that a barren wife was unacceptable for their only son. Richard, for all his professed love, hadn't disagreed. 3 years of pitying glances and whispers had driven her west, away from a society that valued women primarily as vessels for the next generation. Here, perhaps, she could be valued for her mind, for her ability to teach, for something beyond her broken womb. The supper bell interrupted her thoughts. Downstairs, she found herself seated at a long table with several other boarders, a traveling salesman, an elderly couple on their way to visit a daughter in California, and a tall, broad-shouldered man with sun-weathered skin who barely looked up from his plate. Mrs. Wilson made introductions around the table. "And that there's Owen McLain," she said, nodding toward the quiet man. "Owns the largest cattle spread this side of Pine Creek." At the mention of Pine Creek, Lillian looked up with interest. "Pine Creek? That's where I'm headed. I'm to be the new schoolteacher." Owen McLain finally raised his eyes to meet hers, and Lillian was struck by their unexpected color, a clear, pale blue against his tanned face. He nodded politely. "Been waiting on a schoolteacher. Got plenty of young uns needing learning in Pine Creek." His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that suggested southern origins. Though his manner was reserved, there was nothing unfriendly in his demeanor, merely the quiet self-containment of a man accustomed to his own company. "Do you have children, Mr. McLain?" the elderly woman asked, passing him a basket of bread. A shadow crossed his face. "No, madam. Never been blessed that way." The conversation moved on, but Lillian found herself stealing glances at Owen throughout the meal. He ate efficiently, spoke only when directly addressed, and excused himself as soon as he'd finished. Morning came with a brilliant sunrise that painted the dusty town in hues of gold and pink. Lillian breakfasted early, then decided to explore White Rock while waiting for the noon stagecoach. She had just stepped out of the general store when a commotion down the street caught her attention. A wagon had overturned, spilling crates and barrels across the road. A woman's frantic cries rose above the confusion. "My baby! My baby's under there!" Without thinking, Lillian gathered her skirts and ran toward the scene. A small crowd had already gathered, and she pushed her way through to see a young mother being restrained as she tried to reach the overturned wagon. "He was playing near the wheel when it tipped," the woman sobbed. Several men were already trying to lift the heavy wagon, but it had settled awkwardly, and their efforts were uncoordinated. Then Owen McLain appeared, taking charge with quiet authority. "Together now," he directed, positioning himself at a critical point. "On my count. 1, 2, 3. The wagon shifted, and a small boy's frightened wail emerged from beneath. In seconds, Owen had dropped to his knees and pulled the child free, examining him quickly for injuries before returning him to his hysterical mother. "He's scared more than hurt," Owen assured her, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he brushed dust from the boy's hair. "Might have some bruises, but nothing's broken." The relief on the mother's face as she clutched her son moved something deep within Lillian. She stood transfixed, watching as Owen spoke quietly to the child, eliciting a tremulous smile despite the tears. When he straightened and turned, Owen's eyes met Lillian's across the dispersing crowd. Something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared humanity in a harsh land. He nodded slightly before moving away to help right the wagon. By noon, Lillian was waiting for the Pine Creek stagecoach, her trunks beside her on the boardwalk. She was surprised when Owen McLain approached, leading a fine chestnut mare. "Miss Gardner," he said, removing his hat. "I'm heading back to Pine Creek myself. Thought you might appreciate knowing you'll have a familiar face on the journey." "That's very kind, Mr. McLain," she replied, noticing for the first time the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The coach arrived, already carrying 2 passengers, a middle-aged minister and his wife, traveling to a church conference beyond Pine Creek. Once Lillian was settled inside and her trunks secured, Owen mounted his horse and rode alongside as they pulled away from White Rock. The journey was less jarring than the previous day's travel, though still far from comfortable. When they stopped to rest the horses at a creek crossing, Owen approached with a canteen. "Water's fresh here," he said, offering it to her. "Better than what's in the coach barrel." "Thank you." Their fingers brushed as she accepted the canteen, and Lillian was surprised by the warmth that spread through her at the brief contact. "What brings you to Pine Creek?" he asked as she drank. "Beyond the teaching position, I mean." Lillian capped the canteen, choosing her words carefully. "A new beginning. Boston held. Painful memories." Owen nodded, not pressing for details. "Pine Creek's a good place for new beginnings. Young town, growing fast. People tend to look forward, not back. And you, Mr. McLain? Are you from these parts originally?" A slight smile softened his features. "No, madam. Tennessee-born, Texas-raised. Came up with a cattle drive 5 years back and saw the potential in this valley. Started with 30 head and a run-down cabin. Got somewhat more now." The driver called for passengers to reboard, cutting their conversation short. As the journey continued, Lillian found herself watching the landscape change, pine forests beginning to appear among the rolling hills. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the trail as they finally approached Pine Creek. Unlike White Rock, Pine Creek showed signs of prosperity and permanence. A proper main street featured a hotel, several stores, a bank, and even a small church. Most importantly to Lillian, she could see a white schoolhouse set slightly apart from the other buildings. "School board fixed up the teachers' quarters behind the schoolhouse," Owen informed her as they rolled to a stop. "It's small, but should be comfortable enough." To her surprise, he didn't immediately ride off to his ranch, but instead helped unload her trunks and accompanied her to the schoolhouse. The school board chairman, Mr. Peterson, was waiting with keys and a brief orientation. "Classes start Monday morning," he informed her. 28 pupils ranging from 6 to 15 years. Previous teacher left detailed notes. The attached living quarters were indeed small, just a bedroom, sitting room, and tiny kitchen but clean and well furnished. A vase of wildflowers sat on the table, and the cupboard contained basic provisions. "Ladies' auxiliary wanted you comfortable," Owen explained, seeing her surprise at the thoughtful touches. "Small town like this, new schoolteacher is big news." As Mr. Peterson excused himself to attend to other business, Owen lingered a moment longer. "My ranch is about 4 miles north," he said. "If you need anything before you get settled, send word. Town's generally safe, but I'd suggest keeping your door locked at night nonetheless." "You've been very kind, Mr. McLain," Lillian said, genuinely touched by his consideration. He replaced his hat, nodding slightly. "Welcome to Pine Creek, Miss Gardner. Hope you find what you're looking for here." The weekend passed in a flurry of preparation as Lillian familiarized herself with the classroom, reviewed the previous teacher's notes, and met several townspeople who stopped by to introduce themselves. By Monday morning, she stood nervously before her 28 pupils, who regarded her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright skepticism. "Good morning," she began. "I am Miss Gardner, your new teacher. I've come all the way from Boston to be here with you, and I'm very excited to begin our learning journey together." The first weeks were challenging as Lillian established her authority and adapted her Eastern education methods to the needs of frontier children. Some pupils came from farms miles away, attending only when they could be spared from chores. Others, like 10-year-old Emma Peterson, were bright and eager but had never been challenged to think beyond rote memorization. Lillian threw herself into teaching, finding purpose in the eager faces that greeted her each morning. She saw little of Owen McLain during this time, though she heard his name mentioned frequently as one of the area's most successful ranchers. October brought the first frost and with it, Pine Creek's Harvest Festival. The entire community gathered for a day of competitions, shared food, and socializing before winter set in. Lillian found herself swept into preparations, helping organize children's races and contributing a Boston cream pie to the dessert table. "Miss Gardner!" Emma Peterson called, running up as Lillian arranged her pie among the other desserts. Mr. McLain brought his new foal for the children to see. "Come look." Following her enthusiastic pupil, Lillian found Owen surrounded by excited children, a beautiful chestnut foal with a white blaze standing calmly beside him despite the commotion. "She's only 4 months old," he was explaining, "but she'll grow to be as fine a horse as her mother." His eyes met Lillian's over the children's heads, and his serious expression warmed into a smile. "Miss Gardner. Good to see you settled in. The children speak highly of you, Mr. McLain," she replied, "especially when discussing horses." "Only thing I know better than cattle," he admitted. "This little lady will be ready for a gentle rider in a couple years. Maybe a schoolteacher who might want to explore beyond town boundaries." The implied future connection wasn't lost on Lillian, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest. "I'm afraid I've never been much of a horsewoman, Mr. McLain. Never too late to learn," he said simply. As the day progressed, Lillian found herself repeatedly in Owen's company judging pie contests, watching children's races, and finally sharing a meal at one of the long tables set up in the town square. He was more talkative than she'd previously seen, telling stories of cattle drives that had the children wide-eyed with excitement. When the music started and couples began to dance, Owen hesitated before turning to her. "Would you care to dance, Miss Gardner?" The fiddle music was nothing like the formal waltzes of Boston society, but Lillian found herself laughing as Owen guided her through unfamiliar steps. His hand at her waist was strong but gentle, and despite his size, he moved with unexpected grace. "You're doing fine for a city girl," he teased when she apologized for stepping on his foot. "You're very kind to pretend I'm not terrible," she replied, flushed from exertion and enjoyment. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit around the square, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Owen walked Lillian back to the schoolhouse, carrying a basket of leftover food the ladies' auxiliary had insisted she take. "Thank you for the dances," she said as they reached her door. "I enjoyed today more than I expected to. Pine Creek grows on you." he said, handing her the basket. As do its people, I hope. There was a question in his eyes that Lillian wasn't ready to answer. She took the basket, careful not to let their hands touch. Good night, Mr. McLain. Good night, Miss Gardner. Winter descended on Pine Creek with a ferocity that shocked Lillian's eastern sensibilities. Snow piled high around the schoolhouse, and attendance dwindled as outlying farms became isolated. Still, she kept the school open for those who could make it, often teaching only a handful of students from town. One particularly bitter December morning, she arrived at the schoolhouse to find the stove cold, and the coal bin nearly empty. As she struggled to light a fire with the remaining coal, a knock came at the door. Owen stood there, his hat and shoulders dusted with snow, a wagon loaded with coal behind him. Heard the school was running low, he said, stomping his boots. Brought enough to last through January, I reckon. Mr. McLain, you're a godsend, Lillian exclaimed. The children would have frozen today. Together they filled the coal bin, and by the time the first students arrived, the schoolroom was warming nicely. Owen declined her offer to stay for coffee, citing ranch duties, but paused at the door. Christmas socials coming up at the church, he said, brushing coal dust from his hands. Wondered if you might save me a dance or two. The warmth that spread through Lillian had nothing to do with the now roaring stove. I'd like that very much. The Christmas social brought nearly every resident of Pine Creek together in the small church, decorated with pine boughs and handmade ornaments. Children performed recitations, the ladies' auxiliary served punch and cookies, and eventually, the pews were pushed back for dancing. Owen found Lillian admiring the children's artwork displayed on one wall. Seems you've made quite an impression, he said, nodding toward a crude drawing labeled Miss Gardner in wobbly letters. Tommy Wilson never drew a thing before you came. He has talent, she replied. They all do, in different ways. As does their teacher. Owen offered his arm. Our dance, I believe? This time, Lillian moved more confidently through the steps, guided by Owen's steady presence. As the evening progressed, she found herself watching him interact with others, respectful with the elders, jovial with his peers, and endlessly patient with the children who seemed drawn to him. You would have made a wonderful father, she said without thinking as they stepped outside for a breath of air. Something flickered in his eyes, a momentary pain quickly masked. Kind of you to say. The awkward moment was broken by shouts from inside as midnight approached, and with it, Christmas Day. They returned to join the countdown and wishes of Merry Christmas that echoed through the small church. In the commotion, Owen pressed a small package into Lillian's hand. Not much, he murmured, but I thought you might like it. Later, alone in her quarters, Lillian unwrapped the gift to find a beautifully carved wooden bookmark inlaid with a pressed wildflower. A small note read simply, For new chapters. O.M. Winter gradually loosened its grip on Pine Creek, and with spring came renewed activity. Lillian's class grew as farm children returned, and she expanded her curriculum to include nature studies that took advantage of the reawakening landscape. One April afternoon, she was leading her students on a wildflower identification walk when they encountered Owen mending a fence line along the road. Mr. McLain! Several children called out, breaking formation to run toward him. He straightened, pushing his hat back to wipe his brow. Afternoon, scholars. Miss Gardner. We're studying spring flora, Lillian explained, approaching with her clipboard. The children are cataloging what they find. Found a lady's slipper over yonder yesterday, he said, pointing toward a copse of trees. Might be worth adding to your collection. The children clamored to see, and Lillian found herself leading her excited class in the direction he'd indicated, Owen falling into step beside her. How's the teaching going? He asked. Wonderfully, she admitted. These children are so eager to learn, despite having so many other responsibilities. It's humbling. They're lucky to have you, he said simply. Town's different since you came. Better. Before she could respond, Emma Peterson's excited voice rang out. Miss Gardner! Mr. McLain! Come quick, there's something in the hollow tree. The something proved to be a tiny, abandoned wolf pup, eyes barely open, whimpering pathetically in a tree hollow. Mother's probably been shot, Owen said grimly, kneeling to examine the pup. Ranchers don't take kindly to wolves near their stock. Will it die? Asked Tommy Wilson, his lower lip trembling. Owen cradled the tiny creature in his large hands. Not if we care for it proper, he said, looking up at Lillian. Might make a decent lesson for your scholar's responsibility, nature's ways. Lillian hesitated. I know nothing about raising a wolf pup. I do, Owen said simply. My pa raised one when I was a boy. They can be tamed if taken young enough. And so the wolf pup came to school, housed in a box beside the stove. Owen provided detailed instructions for its care and visited daily to check on its progress. The children named it Scout and took turns feeding it with the special formula Owen prepared. These daily visits gave Lillian and Owen time to talk, brief conversations at first, then longer discussions as spring advanced. She learned about his ranch, his dreams for expanding his breeding stock, his childhood in Tennessee before the war took his father and brothers. In turn, she shared stories of Boston, her love of literature, and gradually, hesitantly, the illness that had left her barren and the fiancé who had abandoned her because of it. He wasn't worthy of you, Owen said flatly when she finished. They were sitting on the schoolhouse steps while the children played with Scout, now growing rapidly into a leggy, playful pup. A man who'd leave over something like that wasn't looking for a wife, just a breeding mare. The blunt assessment startled a laugh from her. That's one way to put it. Only honest way, Owen replied. There's more to marriage than children. More to a woman's worth, too. His words warmed something long cold inside her. Not everyone sees it that way. Then they're blind fools, he said simply, rising as the school bell rang to call the children inside. See you tomorrow, Miss Gardner. As spring turned to summer, Lillian found herself looking forward to Owen's visits with increasing anticipation. The wolf pup, now half-grown and remarkably dog-like in behavior, provided a continuing excuse for their interactions, even after school let out for summer. The town noticed. Lillian became aware of speculative glances and sudden silences when she entered the general store or post office. Mrs. Peterson, the board chairman's wife, finally addressed it directly over tea one afternoon. Owen McLain's a good man, she said, stirring sugar into her cup. Been alone too long, if you asked me. Lillian felt her cheeks warm. We're friends, Mrs. Peterson. He's been kind enough to help with Scout. Ma'am, the older woman replied, unconvinced. Never seen him spend so much time in town before you came. Man rides 4 miles each way, most days. Not just for a wolf pup. Unable to deny the observation, Lillian changed the subject, but the conversation lingered in her mind. Was she reading too much into Owen's attention? And even if she wasn't, could she encourage his interest knowing she could never give him children? The 4th of July celebration brought these questions to a crisis. The entire town gathered for a picnic, followed by the schoolchildren reciting the Declaration of Independence. Scout, now nearly full-grown but gentle as a lamb, sat obediently at the edge of the gathering, drawing admiring comments from visitors from neighboring settlements. Remarkable animal, one man observed to Owen. Wouldn't have believed a wolf could be so tame. Credit goes to Miss Gardner and the children, Owen replied, though they both knew he'd been equally involved in Scout's raising. As darkness fell and preparations for fireworks began, Owen drew Lillian away from the crowd. Would you walk with me a spell? He asked, uncharacteristically hesitant. They strolled toward the creek that gave the town its name, Scout loping ahead of them in the gathering dusk. The sounds of the celebration faded behind them, replaced by the gentle gurgle of water over stones, and the evening calls of birds settling for the night. I'm not one for fancy words, Owen began, stopping beside a massive cottonwood tree. Never had much schooling, and poetry's not my strong suit. Lillian's heart began to race. You express yourself just fine, Owen. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and his eyes warmed at the sound of it. "Lillian," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. "I find myself thinking about you when you're not around. Wondering what you'd say about things I see, or what might make you smile." He took her hands in his touch gentle despite the calluses earned through years of ranch work. "I know we come from different worlds. You're educated, cultured. I'm just a cattleman trying to build something in this valley." "Owen," she began, but he shook his head. "Let me finish, or I might lose my nerve." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Lillian Gardner. I think I started falling that first day at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. Would you consider becoming my wife?" Joy and sorrow warred within her. "Owen, you don't know what you're asking. I told you about my condition. I can never give you children. I'm asking to marry you," he said firmly. "Not your womb. I've lived 33 years without children. If God means us to be childless together, I can accept that." Tears filled her eyes. "You say that now, but what about years from now? I've seen how good you are with the schoolchildren, how natural it is for you. You should have a son to teach ranching to, a daughter to dote on." Owen reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. "What I should have is a wife I cherish, who challenges my mind and warms my heart. That's you, Lillian. Only you." A burst of colored light illuminated the sky as the fireworks began, casting his earnest face in momentary red glow. "I love you," she whispered, the words freeing something long caged within her. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of you resenting me someday. Of not being enough." Owen drew her closer, his arms encircling her with warmth and strength. "You're more than enough. You're everything." When he kissed her, it was gentle and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded. Scout howled softly in the background, as if approving. They were married in late August in Pine Creek's small church, with the entire town in attendance. Lillian wore a pale blue dress ordered from Denver, and Owen looked uncommonly formal in a new suit. Scout, wearing a special collar for the occasion, sat obediently at the foot of the altar. The McLain ranch welcomed its new mistress with a freshly painted bedroom, bookshelves built by Owen's own hands, and a gentle mare named Daisy that Lillian was slowly learning to ride. She continued teaching, making the 4-mile journey to town with Owen when weather permitted. Winter came again, harsher than the previous year. January brought a blizzard that isolated the ranch for nearly a week. When it finally cleared enough for travel, Owen insisted on checking on some of the more remote homesteads where families with young children might be struggling. "Back before nightfall," he promised, kissing her goodbye. Scout whined at the door, and after a moment's hesitation, Owen whistled for him. "Come on, boy. You can help break trail." Hours later, as the early winter dusk began to fall, Lillian saw them returning but not alone. Owen's horse was pulling a travois, and upon it lay a woman, wrapped in blankets. Scout ran ahead, barking to announce their arrival. Lillian rushed outside. "What happened?" "Found her in an abandoned line shack," Owen explained as they carefully moved the unconscious woman inside. "No food, barely any firewood. Must have gotten caught in the storm." The woman was young, perhaps 20, and clearly with child, her swollen belly straining against the blankets. Her face was pale with cold and hunger, but she was breathing steadily. "She needs a doctor," Lillian said, already heating water and gathering clean linens. "Can't get to town in this snow, especially not with her condition," Owen replied grimly. "Roads barely passable for a man on horseback." As if in response to their voices, the woman's eyes fluttered open, brown eyes filled with confusion and fear. "My baby," she whispered. "Please help my baby." "You're safe," Lillian assured her, holding a cup of water to her parched lips. "What's your name?" "Sarah," the woman managed. "Sarah Johnson. My husband. We were heading west. Indians attacked our wagon train. He didn't." She broke off with a sob. "Rest now," Lillian soothed. "You're safe here." Throughout the night, Lillian and Owen took turns sitting with Sarah, whose condition seemed to stabilize with warmth and food. By morning, however, it became clear the baby wasn't waiting for better weather or a doctor's arrival. Sarah's labor had begun. Having grown up in Boston, Lillian had never attended a birth, but Owen's experience with livestock proved surprisingly relevant. Together, they worked through the long hours of Sarah's labor, encouraging her, wiping her brow, helping her walk when walking was possible, and holding her hands when the pain became too intense. "You can do this," Lillian told the exhausted young woman as the labor entered its 15th hour. "Your baby needs you to be strong now." Finally, as the winter sun began to set on the second day, Sarah's child entered the world, a tiny, perfect girl with a shock of dark hair and a lusty cry that filled the bedroom. "You have a daughter," Lillian told the exhausted mother, placing the swaddled infant in her arms. Sarah looked down at the child, then up at Lillian and Owen with tears streaming down her face. "I can't. I have nothing to offer her. No home, no husband, no way to provide." "Don't worry about that now," Owen said gently. "Just rest. Everything looks different after sleep." But when morning came, Sarah's fever had risen dangerously. Despite their best efforts, she slipped away as the sun crested the eastern hills, leaving her newborn daughter orphaned in a strange land. Lillian sat by the bed, the tiny infant in her arms, tears flowing freely. "What will happen to her now?" she asked as Owen covered Sarah's still form with a sheet. "Closest orphanage is in Cheyenne," he said heavily. "But in this weather..." The baby whimpered, tiny fingers curling around Lillian's thumb with surprising strength. Something fierce and protective rose within her as she looked down at the perfect, helpless face. "We can't send her away," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "She's already lost everything." Owen knelt beside the chair where Lillian sat, looking at the infant with an expression of wonder. "What are you saying, Lillian?" "I'm saying..." She took a deep breath. "I'm saying maybe God had a plan all along. Maybe Sarah found our ranch because her baby was meant to be here. With us." Owen's weathered hand gently stroked the baby's dark hair. "You always wanted to be a mother," he said softly. "And you a father," Lillian replied, her voice catching. "I know it's not the same as having our own child, but Lillian," Owen interrupted, his blue eyes suspiciously bright. "You once told me you thought you could never bear a child." He reached out to cradle both her and the infant in his strong arms. "Then God gave us this one to love." In that moment, with winter sunlight streaming through the window and a newborn's breath warm against her neck, Lillian knew she had found the family she'd thought forever denied to her. Not in the way she'd once imagined, but in a way no less miraculous. They named the baby Grace, for the divine favor they felt had brought her to them. The adoption was formalized when the circuit judge passed through in spring, and by summer, no one would have guessed Grace McLain wasn't born to the couple who adored her. Scout appointed himself the baby's guardian, sleeping beneath her crib and alerting Lillian with gentle whines when Grace awakened in the night. The wolf dog's gentleness with the child became legendary in Pine Creek, another testament to the unusual family Owen and Lillian had created. As Grace grew, so did the McLain Ranch. Owen's careful breeding program produced cattle sought after throughout the territory, and Lillian's small school expanded to include a library funded by ranch profits. Their home became known for its hospitality, with Sunday dinners that welcomed lonely cowboys and struggling homesteaders alike. On Grace's 3rd birthday, as the little girl blew out candles on a cake Lillian had baked, Owen presented his wife with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, opening it to find a delicate silver locket. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny portrait of Grace on one side, and on the other, a miniature photograph of a young boy about a year old, with Owen's blue eyes and Lillian's gentle smile. "I don't understand," she said, looking up in confusion. Owen took her hand, his expression a mixture of joy and nervousness. "Mrs. Wilson wrote me last week. There's a baby boy in White Rock. Mother died in childbirth, father killed in a mining accident the month before." Lillian's heart began to race. Owen, are you saying? He nodded. If you're willing. Grace could use a brother, and we have love enough to spare. Tears filled Lillian's eyes as she closed the locket in her palm. When can we go get him? Soon as you're ready, Mrs. McLain, Owen replied, his voice rough with emotion. Our family's not complete yet. Under the vast Wyoming sky, on land claimed by courage and nurtured by love, the McLain family continued to grow not by blood but by choice, each child a testament to the family's belief that love, not biology, makes a parent. And each night, as Lillian and Owen tucked their children into bed, they exchanged a look of profound gratitude for the twists of fate and strands of faith that had brought them together, proving that family could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as life's deepest disappointments.